So we've seen bit vectors and we've seen the RSA, rank select access queries. We've also seen how to make them efficient with Jacobson's rank and Clark's select. But that's just with bit vectors. We ultimately want to be able to do RSA-like things, but with strings. So we need some kind of bridge from the world of bit vectors to the world of strings, and that's where wavelet trees come in. Let's take a look at them. So it's common to use trees to store data in such a way that the nodes in the tree and the splits in the tree are sort of dividing up the value space. Right? This is sort of true. You could say this is true for binary search trees, for tries, for similar data structures. What we're doing here is going to be a little bit different because we are taking a string and we're essentially indexing it to make it easy to navigate. And the way we're going to do that is through repeated partitioning of the alphabet. Okay? So this is going to use the idea of partitioning the alphabet space. Let's see what that could mean. We'll start with this string Mississippi. And let's start by partitioning the alphabet into just two sets. There's 4 characters here, so we'll partition it into 2 sets of 2. So we'll make I and M be the first partition, and then we can make P and S be the second partition. Okay? And then we can rewrite our string, Mississippi, but use color to show how we are. Basically, these 2 partitions are dividing the string up into 2 subsequences, right? The subsequence that has characters from the black partition and the subsequence that has characters from the blue partition. Okay, and we can also write this as a sequence of bits where the bit 0 corresponds to characters that are in the first partition and the bit 1 corresponds to characters that are in the second partition. So I'm using both color and these bits to show which characters go into which partition. And once we've done this, we can take out the 2 subsequences, right? We can take out the subsequence that just has M's and I's, which would be M, I, and we can take out the subsequence that just has P's and S's, which would be SS, SS, PP. So if we do that split, then we can get a diagram that looks like this, where now we've got only the subsequence that has M's and I's and only the subsequence that has P's and S's, and we can do this recursively until finally we get down to what will be the base case, the sort of leaf nodes. What goes in this next layer? Well, that's going to be the leaves, because by this point here we've only got 2 characters. So once we split it a second time, we'll have 1 character in each of the 2 splits. So those will be the leaf nodes. And in the leaf nodes, we will note the character, the 1 remaining character in the alphabet. Okay? So at the end of the day, the shape of the tree is like this. We can actually pick the partitionings differently if we want to. And we'll see this more later. That will affect the shape of the tree. But either way, the idea is the same. Every internal node is taking the alphabet and splitting it into 2 partitions. Once the partition gets down to having just 1 character, we have a leaf. And that leaf node is annotated with the 1 remaining character. Now this diagram is showing more than what's in the wavelet tree. So let me simplify it. I'll just take out the splits first, and then I'm just going to take away the subsequences that are labeling the internal nodes. There you go, they're gone. So now all that's left is the bit strings at the internal nodes and the characters in the leaves. That's all that's left. And this is our wavelet tree. Okay. So we took away those strings that were labeling the internal nodes. So we might wonder, well, can we still use this data structure to do queries like the kinds of queries we studied with bit vectors, rank select access? And how big is this? Right? It seems nice that we got rid of the strings, but first we have to convince ourselves that we can still do the queries. Then we have to convince ourselves, is this small? Is this a reasonable size? The rest of this video will answer this question, and we'll defer the question of how big this thing is to the next video. Okay, so let's first ask, do the RSA queries extend naturally to strings? Okay. So first, let me just pause here and say, it seems to be good news that we have a wavelet tree and that the internal nodes consist of these bit vectors. Because after all, we know a lot about bit vectors now, and we know very efficient ways of indexing and navigating bit vectors. So hopefully what this is doing is it's helping us to take all the problems that we would like to solve with respect to strings and essentially decomposing them into sub-problems that we can solve by querying bit vectors. That seems to be where we're headed. That seems to be a good direction. Okay, let's first just make sure we can define these queries for strings. We haven't done that yet. We've only defined them for bit vectors. This is easy to do. So the access query is trivial. We're just accessing the character at a given position, right? It used to be, when we were dealing with bit vectors, that it could be either 0 or 1. Now it could be any character in the alphabet. Rank, similarly, is defined just like with bit vectors. The complication being now the character that's part of our query that we would write here in the subscript of the rank query can be any character from the alphabet. There's more than just rank sub 0 and rank sub 1. Right now we have rank sub any character in the alphabet. But the way it's defined is very similar to before. We look at all the previous positions in the string from 0 up to the character just to the left, the character just prior. And we increment our counter every time we encounter C. So it's basically the number of times C occurred to the left in the string. Select, similarly, it's defined just like we did with bit vectors. So the query has a character subscript, because we could be selecting the ith instance of any of the characters of the alphabet. The I is a rank. So like, for example, we might be selecting in the string Mississippi, we might be doing a select on the I of rank 2 or the S of rank 3. And that's just basically telling us what's the offset of that the character of that rank, okay? Defined in terms of this maximum. So another way of saying that is what's the maximum offset where the rank equals I. Okay, and this capital S is a string, and this lowercase c is a character from the alphabet. So let's see how to actually answer these queries using the wavelet tree data structure. Let's start with access. That is usually a fairly easy thing to do. Here it's going to have some subtlety. So let's start with an example. Let's say we have a string. We know that the string is Mississippi. I haven't drawn it here, but the string is Mississippi. And what we're asking is we'd like to know what's at offset 4 in the string Mississippi. All right? So here's how we'd solve that problem. We would start up at the top, at the root. And the first thing we would ask is we would take the bit vector at the root and ask the access query, just turn around and pose the same access query to that string. Okay, so what will the answer be? Well, it's whatever's at offset 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's this 0 right here. So the answer to that query will be a 0. So you might be looking at this and saying, what happened here? You know, the original question was access 4, and all we did was turn around and ask the access 4 question. Isn't that kind of circular? But no, there's a difference, because this is the question being asked over the string, and this is the question being asked just over the bit vector that's in the root. So we are answering a smaller question here. We're just asking this question over the bit vector at the root. Okay? So getting 0 as the result of this query is basically telling us that what we should do next, basically it's saying that the character at offset 4 is in the left partition, the partition of characters in the left child. So getting back a 0 from this query tells us that we should go this way. We should descend to the left child. Okay? The child that has the partition that includes whatever this character is. We actually don't know what it is yet. We just know if it's a 0, that means it's either an I or an M. But we have more work to do to figure out whether it's I or M. Okay, so we descend into this left child. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to get rid of part of this tree. We don't need it anymore. We've descended into the left child, so we don't need that stuff that was on the right. Now we're here. We're at this internal node, and we'd like to ask a new access question here. But the question is, what position do we want to access? Well, let's remind ourselves. Let's go back up here. When we did access up here, we said, okay, well this, we're looking for whichever character is here. We don't know yet whether it's an I or an M. Okay? But we do know that it is the 0, 1, 2, it's the third I or M in the string, okay? So if we go down here, this now is the subsequence consisting of only I's and M's. So if we were at 0, 1, 2, the offset 0, 1, 2 with respect to that subsequence up here, then we want to be at 0, 1, 2, this offset with respect to this subsequence down here. So what does that equal? Well, that equals the rank of this 0 in this string. And it's important to point out, I'm saying that it equals the rank of this 0 in the parent bit vector. All right, so what do I have to write here? I have to now like invoke the parent, so I'm just going to call it parent, dot rank. And this is a bit vector rank. I'm asking for the 0 rank of the 0 that's at offset 4, right? I'm basically asking what was the rank of the bit that I did the access on up here. Okay? And so that equals this part. Let me underline it. This part equals 2, right? 2 prior zeros. So this part equals 2. So this dot access is going to end up being a dot access at offset 2, which just means we do 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, and that's a 0. So the answer is 0. And that's telling us, again, just like it did up here, getting this 0 down here tells us to descend into the left child. So it was ambiguous whether we had an M or an I. Now that we've done an access at this position, we see a 0, and we know that we're in the left partition of the next split, which is the split between M and I, and the partition on the left is the one for I. Okay? So here's what we did. And all of that is telling us that the answer is I. Once we get to a leaf, we know what character is at that position that we originally asked about. Okay? I'm in a leaf, so I just return the label. So the answer to the access for query is I. And we learned that by descending this tree, doing a combination of access and rank queries on its constituent bit vectors, and then reading off the label in the leaf. Okay? And this in general is how it works. Here's the algorithm. So wavelet tree access looks like this. I won't go through it in detail, but the parts that are interesting is down here. This is where we are deciding whether to descend into the left or right child. And then this is the part where we're obtaining the new offset where we should do our next access query. Okay, so it's just a loop that descends, right? This is the part where we do the descent. And the question of should we descend to the left or to the right depends on this access query, which in turn depends on this rank query. Okay, so let's observe for a moment that our tree doesn't have to look like the tree that we showed here, right? Like, for example, it might seem like a bad idea to make this tree if it turns out that the different characters have very different frequencies, as they kind of do for this example, right? So in this example, we have Mississippi. I and S are more frequent than M or P, right? So it could be that the wise shape, the better shape for this tree would be to take either I or S and split it off first, to do something like Huffman, right, which would probably decide to merge M and P first, and then I would grab on, and then S would grab on at higher levels of that tree. Like the tree might look like this. So here's a Huffman-shaped tree for that same example. Okay? And so what's interesting about this tree shape is that just as we already know, since these are the sorts of trees that we build with Huffman, they give us prefix codes, right? If we consider each character in the string to be to have a code that's equal to the sequence of edge labels that I would follow on my way from the root to that node, that gives us a code, a prefix code, which in this example looks like this, right? So the code for I is just 0 because I go down that way. The code for S is 1, 0 because I go down that way. The code for P is 1, 1, 0. You get the idea. right? So Huffman could give us a tree of this shape, and then a tree of that shape would actually have it's a prefix code, but it would give the different characters different lengths of code. So let's just do the same example here, where we ask for .access 4, but we need to answer this question using the wavelet tree. So we said first step was to do .access 4 on the bit vector at the root. That's going to give us, okay, 1, 2, 3, oh, sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 0. That tells us to descend into the left child. And this time, we're done, right? Because it so happened that we were asking for the character at offset 4, and that character was I, and the Huffman tree put I in the very first split. So we could absolutely do it this way, too. The tree can have a different shape. A good example of a shape you might want to give it would be a Huffman shape. Okay, so that was access. Let's now look at rank. And there's kind of a fundamental difference between the access query and the rank query. The access query is asking for what is the character at offset I. The rank query can be asking about any character at any offset. So we have to think about that, right? So okay, yeah, there is an answer to the rank query for any character at any offset, and we know what it ought to be. It should be the number of times that character has appeared to the left. And we might be asking how many times has a character occurred to the left for a character that does occur at offset I, or we might be asking it about a character that does not occur at offset I. Either way, we need to be able to answer it either way. All right? But the interesting thing here is if you think of the wavelet tree, right? The splits in the wavelet tree depend on splits that we've made in the alphabet. Now, we are trying to navigate to the leaf that has the label C. That'll be what we're doing in the process of answering this rank query. In order to do that, we need to know which direction to go at each level of the tree. When we did the access query, the direction to go depended on the result of that bit vector access query. Here, it depends on what's the character, and specifically on what's the code for that character. The code for that character is a bit string that tells us how to go left and right through the tree. Okay, so that'll be a little different from access. But apart from that, it's kind of similar. So now let's do an example. Let's say this is our string Mississippi again, and this is back to the original way of partitioning the alphabet, where we take M and I on one side, S and P on the other. And this now is we're asking for the rank sub I, so I being a character from the alphabet, the rank sub I at offset 6. And let's remember that when we go to answer this query, the path we take through the tree is going to be determined by the subscript. It's determined by the character we're asking about. So we need to bring in, the codes for the different characters. We have to assume that this is something that we know ahead of time. We know the character's codes. And I've highlighted I in purple. All right, so I's code is 0, 0, corresponding to the fact that it's down that branch. So we know that when we go to calculate the rank sub I at 6, that the path we're going to take through the tree goes like this. Okay, so we can actually just erase the rest of it. We don't need it. And let's go through the process of actually answering the rank query. So the first thing we're going to do is ask a rank question about the bit string here at the root. So we're going to do dot rank, okay, sub 0, okay? And why is it a rank sub 0? Well, because we're taking the first character of the code for I, the first bit, I should say, of the code for I, and it's 0. So that's what goes down here. Okay, so the rank sub 0 at 6. Okay, so in other words, how many zeros come prior to position 6? 1, 2, so okay, let me number the positions. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the ones I care about. So I'm going to count the zeros 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And so the answer to that rank query is 3. Okay? All right, so what does that tell me? That tells me, remember up here, 0 and 1 both correspond to subsets of the alphabet that both have 2 different characters in them. right? So if this is if there are 3 zeros prior to that position, what that means is that there are 3 m's or i's prior to that position. We don't know which are m's and which are i's, but we just know there are 3 m's or i's prior to that position. So what do we do with that information? We use it to go further down. So now we're going to descend into this child, this internal node, and we're going to ask another rank question. Rank subscript, again, it'll be 0. And again, that's because we now are taking the next bit over in our code and inserting that down here. And then we're going to plug in the previous rank, the rank we got in the level just above. So we're asking how many zeros come prior to offset 3, so 0, 1, 2. It's these 2 zeros. These are offsets 0, 1, 2. And so the rank sub 0 at 3 is just a question of counting up these 2 zeros. So the answer to that is 2. Okay? So now that means that prior to the position that we're asking about, the query position, there are 2, and we're now asking for rank sub 0 here. It pertains to the left partition, which is the partition that has just i's. So what we just figured out is how many i's are prior to our query position. How many i's are prior to offset 6? And that was the original question. So this is the answer to the rank query. 2 is the answer to the rank query. Basically, as soon as we get to the point where we're just above a leaf, the answer to our rank query is the answer to the overall rank query. So summarizing what we did, the movements through the tree and the subscripts, so the direction of these movements and the subscripts of all these rank queries, those came from the code for the character that's in the subscript of the rank query. And the overall answer just equals the answer from the final rank query, where we finally know for the particular letter in the alphabet, singular particular level of the letter of the alphabet that we're asking about, how many times did it occur prior. Okay? So this is the algorithm for rank. Again, it's a loop. Start at the root, start at the leftmost bit in the bit vector for that code, and then the basic things we're doing in the loop are asking whether we should go down to the left or to the right, which depends on the code. The subscript of the rank also depends on the code. And then calculate the new offset, which becomes the input to the rank query at the next level down, and then move along to the next bit in the code, and so on. So as we move down the tree, we're moving along the code word, left to right, and at each level we're asking a rank query, taking the output of the previous level's rank query as our input. Okay. So that was rank. We have just one more task left, which is to answer a select query. And select queries are really, in some way, the inverse of rank queries. So it won't surprise you to hear that the select query is going to, in essence, start at the bottom and work its way up, unlike the rank query, which starts at the top and works its way down. So a select query, just like the rank query, has a subscript, all right? And the subscript is a character, and whatever the code for that character is, so in this case, the code for S is 1, 1, well, we can use that code at the very beginning of the algorithm to start at the root and then walk down to the appropriate leaf, because that leaf is where we want to start. So you can think of the very first thing we do as looking up the code word for the subscript, then walking down the tree to the leaf corresponding to that character. Then the process we follow is one where we're walking upward. And when you're walking upward, you don't have any choices, right? You just walk to the parent, right? There's not a choice of parents because it's a tree. So the very first step, we'll walk upward to the parent, and we will perform a select query on that parent. The subscript of the select query is going to depend on how, what was the rightmost bit of the code word. This one that goes in the subscript of the select query corresponds to this 1 in the code word for the character S. And then the input is just the input to the select query down here. Okay? So what's this select query asking? It's saying, give me the offset of the 1 of rank 3. So let's go left to right and consider the ranks of the 1s. 0, 1, 2, 3. There it is. So it's at offset 3. Okay. So that's the first iteration. There we go. So what are we going to do next? We're going to walk up the tree again. We're going to do another select query. Again, the subscript of the select query, my code went away, but remember that the code for S was 1, 1. So the subscript to this select query is going to be 1. And the input to this select query is just going to be the output of the previous select query. So again, we're asking now to please select the 1 of rank 3. And let's think about what that means. Down here, when we were selecting the 1 of rank 3, we were trying to figure out what's the offset into this subsequence of the S that I was asking about down here. But that was with respect to this subsequence. So now, in order to resolve it with respect to this subsequence, I now need to do it again, except I need to select the 1 up here, right? That one now corresponding to the character class that included S up here, which is the character class S and P. Okay, so let's see where that is. What's the offset of the 1 of rank 3? Well, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? This is the 1 of rank 3, and it's at offset 6. So let's put 6. And so that's my answer to the query. Let's just figure out, let's look at Mississippi and see what we did. Well, okay, so the original query was to ask for the S of rank 3, and is that what we found? Well, this is offset 6, and yeah, that's the S of rank 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. So the answer is correct. Okay, so the select query works in kind of a backwards direction. It does something a little bit like the inverse of the rank query. So here's the algorithm. One thing that's interesting here is, of course, the very first thing we're doing is going all the way down to a leaf. All right, so instead of starting at the root, well, we still start at the root, but then the very first thing we do is we just descend all the way to the leaf that corresponds to the character in the subscript of the select query. And then our loop, instead of stepping downward, is now repeatedly stepping upward. Right? We're going to our parent each time. The offset that we are passing to the select query in each round corresponds to what we got from the previous round. And then we move backwards through the code word from the final bit position to the earlier bit positions. Okay, so we have access, rank, select. Rank and select both traverse the tree in a shape that corresponds to the code for the subscript. Access does not. And then select and rank, in some sense, are inverses of each other. When we are doing rank, we're going top down and doing rank queries. When we are doing select, we're going bottom up and doing select queries.